Let me tell you a little more about the time when we lived above the chemist's shop, long before little Annette made an appearance. This was a time when the witnesses, and particularly Magda, considered television as an instrument of sin, and was not approved of by the elders. Yet, interestingly, they all had television sets in prominent positions in their own homes. Therefore, Magdalene, desirous to become completely dedicated and utterly faithful to Jehovah, would not have a bar of it. If I wanted to have a happy family life with her as a witness, and in my case a pretend witness, for my heart was not with it, I had to respect her dictates and desires only. She had to set all the rules and regulations. I had to obey them forever as lectured by her, and always consider my perceived priorities first. We dared not think about even having the smallest television. Radio was also restricted. However, during every Christmas, and especially New Year's Eve, I have discreetly recorded the sounds blaring from the local radio mixed with the sounds of many church bells ringing and fireworks popping in the sky as heard from our open windows. I dared not go out and mingle with the crowds in the streets, where people were wishing Merry Christmas to each other, listening to Christmas music performed by city bands, or, as she used to say, put up with the noisy church bells. New Year's celebrations, which were so very colorful and enjoyable, were considered pagan, and we dared not be spoiled by such sinful practices, so I reluctantly settled with whatever entertainment was available in Magda's presence. As far as I'm concerned, I believe that healthy human minds need some form of entertainment. For her part, she could not wait until those pagan festivities were over, but this attitude was a little too extreme for any cultured person. This is a truth statement. I was cornered into being fully controlled in everything I did or thought, and was imprisoned by just being married. I remember an occasion when listening to the radio, the speaker's voice counting the seconds to midnight to the following year, and I had decided to pour some wine into the crystal goblets to toast the new year with Magda. However, she decided to do house cleaning instead, just to make her point that it was not any different than other days of the year, and in that instant a comic artist recited over the radio, "And now I'm going to sweep clean the last year's refuse and put it all in paper bags. I will save them, among others, on this shelf." A crowd applauding and laughing. Hearing this, Magda said, "Ha, ha, see? Now I'm doing the same, sweeping the floor, and—" "Perhaps," I reacted, "you too should put it all in a paper bag and place it on the shelf." Sadly, everything, like my rare photographs, seemed to clutter the place before and after our move to the market garden, and that attitude was to become more extreme on her side. Her vacuuming the floor was drowning the sounds coming from the old radio. It chimed 12, and half an hour later she decided to have some wine with me, but I had already toasted the new year on my own, as in all other years which were to follow. I recorded the occasion. After finishing her unexpected cleaning chores, she joined me and swallowed the claret like water, gulping it down while her throat made loud noises. "Happy New Year," I said to her, and regretted doing so, as she immediately snapped at me with, "But we don't celebrate these pagan rites, do we?" Then she gulped down the rest of the wine, strange sounds coming from the depths of her throat. Gulp, gulp, gulp. If I did not record those sounds, I would probably ignore the noises she made, but I became very aware of them ever since, saying nothing, instead hoping that someone else would notice and make her aware of it. My marriage thus proved to be no other than a test of endurance over the years. In those days, as well as during the following years of our togetherness, I could never make any suggestions, knowing that I had to be always on the wrong side, and she had to be always right when she was not. While we were still living there, my aunt's son Antoine, traveling to Germany, decided to visit us. He had an old car at the time. We went into the city with him, had a short drive, and chatted about all sorts of things. He told us he was intending to stay in Düsseldorf, and it would be good if we could see each other more often. But the distance between the two cities would take a really long time to travel. I do not think that he took that into account. However, when I was trying to explain something in German to Magda, he insisted that my German was not good enough, and that he could explain things better than I could ever do. I suppose he needed to brag about his supposed great intelligence at every opportunity while making me appear inadequate. This attitude was very apparent, but I doubted whether Magda noticed, and once again ignored the whole thing. I filmed the occasion. He was trying to explain a story about a male person being punched in both eyes, and apparently it was so funny he kept laughing about the victim's swollen eyes. Magda seemed fearful that I would let him stay at our place. Since then, I have not heard from him. His German was lousy. I am so grateful that my childhood friend, although invisible to others, always remains faithful and real to me. It is very hard to talk about him to others because one is immediately judged as being abnormal. When there was nobody I could turn to, ask questions, seek directions or advice, this friend always remained invaluable. He never attempted to decide for me, but I have valued his suggestions, and after all, I was the one who ultimately chose what was most appropriate and right. It was a very healthy relationship, and therefore I have never experienced loneliness. For others, hearing something like this, it would immediately appear to be a disorder. But I was, and am not, any different to other people. I was certainly not abnormal. On the contrary, I was, as I am now, an intellectual. Interestingly, if I ever had any harsh thoughts about circumstances I was subjected to, this childhood friend always advised me to accept and tolerate others. Much later in life, my own research helped me to theorize that this voice I heard might have been a form of superconsciousness belonging to me. In later years, I became even more convinced that the wisdom belonged to a different consciousness, for I was able to communicate with it. The voice often repeated, "Any change you want to see in your world must start with people's own selves first." How true and wise. This has been my motto ever since. I always prefer adaptability and peace with people wherever I happened to be. However, during our stay in that cottage, amongst a variety of classic roses, I recorded Annette's unending cries. One could not be certain whether she was happy or sad, constantly twisting her small head from side to side. Especially after being literally snatched from my arms, she developed a very unusual characteristics. Whenever Emilia was around, and I approached Annette, she made very high-pitched, shrieking sounds, crying uncontrollably. Whenever her grandmother grabbed Annette, apparently jokingly telling her what a bad monster that man, meaning me, was, and that she was only theirs, I felt Emilia, in her mental state, was not helping the situation. It seemed that she had to remind me of it. Obviously, she was incapable of understanding that she was preparing the young child to hate her father. It was probably the only training she was familiar with from her own childhood. This undesirable trend has always been present ever since, evidenced by Annette's behavior patterns. As she grew up, she often shouted, "Don't tell me anything. I don't have to listen to you. You are not my dad anyway." In fact, she felt the need to find excuses to justify her hatred towards me in the most unreasonable ways imaginable. But Magda never took any notice. When Annette was very young, without any discrimination or judgment against anybody, only observing the upbringing methods of her grandparents, who preferred never to listen to any reason or logic, have caused a great deal of damage to her personality. Again, I could only observe and keep quiet, remaining a silent sufferer. I discreetly recorded all those occasions, as otherwise I would have been complained about for being only interested in electronics. Remember, I had to consider my priorities for the rest of my life. Magdalene's star sign was Cancer, and Annette's was Gemini. Imagine talking about something like that to Magda and other witnesses. I have never taken those signs very seriously anyway, yet if I read them from the pages of the daily newspaper, as she once did, she would immediately snap at me. If I quoted from the great psychologists Jung or Freud, she again strongly advised me to stop wasting my time with the sinful ideas of the devil worshippers. I became a man whose intellect was undermined, completely ignored, and hidden from sight when in her presence. I was meant to work, earn money, look after the needs of my family, and serve the interests of Jehovah as dictated by the witnesses. I dared not even think for myself any more. If there was something wrong with the child's mental state, we could always go to Jehovah's Witness elders, who have studied the Bible for many years and would help us. While we lived amongst the roses I loved, my employment with AEG ended, and I began to work for Junkers and Bush Company, testing hot water systems and heaters. They had a few war veterans employed on the factory floor. I remember one who used to sit next to me. He had one wooden leg and used to make sounds like a long drawn-out fart, making everyone on the floor laugh. It was a good time there, but unfortunately this work was only part-time, and I had to leave after a while. Soon afterwards I began working as a quality controller for a textile factory not far from where we lived. It was well-paid employment, but was not a very clean job. After every shift we were encouraged to take a quick shower before going home. I cannot forget how those huge pipes all around the factory made a constant noise, sounding almost like drums being played, or a huge choir of male voices singing religious hymns forever. I still remember that extremely nationalistic drunkard raising his voice and angrily swearing at me. Shortly after I was asked to leave that job, which was proving a little difficult with different shifts every week. There were 3 shifts, morning, afternoon, and night, but the experience was worthwhile. I still wonder about my Portuguese friend, Eduardo Reis, who was studying in Stuttgart and had a part-time job at AEG. When he left Germany, I bought him an LP, Carmina Burana by Carl Orff, after seeing it at a show in Stuttgart, and sent it to him in Portugal. We exchanged letters for a while, but lost touch with each other. I wonder what he has done with his life. I hope that he has been happier than me. Interestingly also, while attending an exhibition of latest electronics and home entertainment, I came across an ad about a position with the American military in Bad Cannstatt, not far from Stuttgart proper, and immediately applied for it through their employment agency. I was accepted to start as soon as possible as an audiovisuals technician, and a short while later I met an Armenian-American military person of high-ranking office who was extremely pleased with my position. When he questioned me about why I was staying in Germany instead of the States, I explained a little about my Turkish adventure. He suggested that after my studies in Germany, I could easily join the American forces, and that would open up a passage for me to settle in the States permanently. But I was unsure how to react. He even suggested that I could be accommodated near his family home. I was engaged in editing and repairing lots of worn-out 16mm films used as teaching aids for the personnel. I was very intrigued about some of the brand-new films when cleaning them, because they were either extremely fragile or easily torn to pieces. For a while I worried that perhaps somebody did not want me in that position and was deliberately adding those rolls of film for me to repair them. Unfortunately, too many of those splices created awful jumps in both picture and sound, thus making the film unwatchable. Being very cautious about tidiness and cleanliness in whatever I did, I hoped I was not being set up. My desire was to stay at this job as long as I could, for it was clean, relaxing, challenging, and well-paid employment. Due to my having changed jobs often, as they saw it, Magda and her relations considered me being unreliable with any kind of employment, and they made deliberate mention of it. They did not question why, simply using it as an excuse to blame me with whatever they could. At least I did not stay unemployed for long, for employment has always been available to me, and there was a constant flow of income. That, naturally, was never spoken of. Fortunately, this employment did not interfere with my studies, and neither Magdalene nor the other witnesses were able to discover that I was still studying. Otherwise, I was quite sure that I would be chastised and disciplined against it. For there was allegedly an urgency to preach the word of God to the multitudes, and I had to consider my priorities first and foremost. Those priorities were dictated by Magda, as she had been conditioned by the biblical wisdom she was subjected to, but they were not mine. From time to time I frequented Munich and visited one of the great universities, where I made many friends amongst the students while attending some of the lectures. I was often asked why I chose to stay in Stuttgart, as it would be better for me to move to Munich. However, during those days I was able to discover some interesting characteristics of the German people in different parts of the country. One of my experiences comes to mind, and I feel I must share it with you. Once when I was traveling to Munich on the train, in the compartment where I was seated, there were a few families with a number of children. Just opposite me sat a very well-presented socialite lady, enjoying chocolate pralines wrapped in colorful foil. She looked as if she was literally talking to those pieces of sweets. But at the same time, a number of children were looking at her chocolates. One little boy particularly got my attention, for I felt he was not from a wealthy background, and looking at those colorful sweet things, his eyes were almost popping out of their sockets, and his mouth was watering. If I had a block of chocolate, I would have given the whole thing to the children, and above all, to that little boy. The socialite woman looked at him a while and said, "What are you looking at? Have you never seen chocolate in your life?" The child's mother told him that it was not nice to look at what other people ate. The socialite woman made little round balls out of the chocolate wrappings and offered them to the child, saying, "Go and sniff them." I found it a little unusual, but remember that occasion with every detail. The woman kept enjoying her chocolates, literally throwing the wrappings to the children. A couple of the mothers looked at my direction knowingly and smiled. I observed and kept quiet. Incredible it may sound, but I have often witnessed similar behavior in different parts of Germany. On another occasion, a family friend of ours invited us to dinner at a restaurant and told us we needed to pay nothing, as this was their gift to their dear friends, including us. Reluctantly at first, but happily I accepted the invitation. We thoroughly enjoyed the food and friendship. Although never interested in any social engagement, Magdalena, too, was surprised by this invitation, and we decided to reciprocate. Unexpectedly, the following week we received a bill from them, to be paid within a certain time frame. We were extremely surprised. I decided to invite them to dinner in an expensive restaurant, where we all had a wonderful time. I never sent any bills to anybody who had accepted our invitation, and a few criticized us for being utterly foolish and not sending out any bills. I personally thanked them for accepting our invitation and for being our friends, and was looking forward to having their company next time. I was certainly learning some Germanic customs. I remember a very quiet family in our neighborhood. One day we were invited to their place for a cup of coffee and chat. Magda was, as always, very reluctant to visit people unless she could preach the word of God to them, and if they were to visit us, she preferred only our brothers in faith to do so.